Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation. This is your host Salah Al-Lathi and I'm here with Jason Little. I think I met Jason back in 2015, the Agile conference, I believe. I was walking around, between sessions and I see this group of people playing this exercise and I just got curious and I joined the table. And I believe Jason was facilitating this exercise called Wicked Problems with the Hot Seat. And that intrigued me. So I got interested in learning more and got to know about his work with lean change management and the book he authored. And since then, I've been a fan. So, Jason, welcome. I'm glad you're here and that we're connected again.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. I remember that was at the Agile conference in DC at the Gaylord National.
Yep. Yeah, I think they hosted the conference a couple of years there. I can't remember if it was 2015 when we met or it was before. But so how you been? I think we haven't really connected since then. How are things going?
Pretty well, especially with the pandemic. The biggest difference for me is just no travel, but I've been working at home for so long. It's been a lot of my stuff has been remote anyway. So there wasn't a lot of prep and things to get ready to get the facilitators running remote courses and things like that. I started running virtual courses a few years back. But other than that, I think we're pretty much here in Canada in a similar boat to everywhere else, just getting vaccines ready to be rolled out and things are still closed and no one's listening and everyone's protesting. And
it's another wicked problem that you could say. So I remember you facilitated also like a 2-day lean change management in DC. We coordinated that together and then that was in person. And now you were saying like everything is online. How is the experience different?
For me, it's, I think, more or less just the timing and engagement. Mm-hmm. So there's a global community of facilitators. There's 58 and they all will kind of do their courses a little bit differently. So trying to find the right balance of how long do you keep people online? I am in the camp that believes shorter bursts over a longer period of time is better. So I would never do 2 8-hour days online with the training course. I think that's just crazy. So I think the biggest challenge was just balancing it. So I started doing remote courses probably 3 or 4 years ago, where it was a combination of self-study material plus 6 90-minute sessions every week to basically do what we would do in an in-person setting. So, a lot of it is just changed towards leaving the online component to be the exercises that we do in the class and the discussions and the interactive stuff. And then the theory is here's the sketchnote videos or here's the instructional videos and here's our online learning platform. Do that stuff in advance. Probably the biggest difference.
I remember the class, there was like it's experiential, hands-on, there's Lego involved and, seeing different perspectives. So that interesting how you could adapt this to the online experience and still keep it experiential and hands-on. I want to step back and just, I know you probably told this story many times, but what inspired you to do this work? Like what got you where you are today?
I think it was really the first large transformation that I worked in. So it had been late 2000s, 2008-ish, somewhere around there. And I think like anyone who is new to Agile coaching, the emphasis is on the Agile stuff and not so much on the enterprise awareness dimension, which is basically, hey, there's, 4 values, 12 principles, a bunch of practices. It's pretty easy stuff. It's not hard to do. Like, why don't people want to do it? And getting exposed to, I think I worked with probably 30 teams across the enterprise. That includes like legal and finance and business process teams and training teams and retail teams and software teams and stuff. So I got insights into the greater organization. And that was really the eye-opening part to Agile's just another trigger for change, much like a reorg or bringing in a new enterprise software package or any other type of organizational change. Agile is just the trigger. So it's not the focus. And back then there wasn't a lot of information about that. I mean, Diana Larson's been talking about this forever. James Shore has been talking about this forever, about the organizational change aspect of it, but it wasn't really front and center back then. So then I just started thinking, well, what if we approach these Agile transformations? Well, back then they were called Agile adoptions. We're going to adopt Agile with Group X or Department Y or whatever it was. What if we did that in an Agile and kind of lean startup-ish way, where where we figured out how to approach it the right way based on what the organization's context and culture was like. So instead of coming in with something that's just too far away, it's pretty easy to say just create cross-functional teams. But when you're starting, I know you've worked in public sector and government. When you've got a century-old organization that's worked a certain way, you can't just go, great, everybody work together and collaborate. They'll be like, yeah, no, sorry. So how do you kind of like nudge your way through it when the people in the organization are in it for the long term? And as coaches, we might be there for a short period of time. So I started poking around the organizational change world and the change management world. And then that's really what started it all, which led to, if people remember Pearson Live Lessons, they did turn into Front Row Agile. And I think Front Row Agile is no longer around. I think as of last year, they morphed into something else. But Lisa Adkins and I started that Live Lessons brand out. She did her coaching Agile teams actually just outside of DC in Virginia at a studio there. And I did mine on Agile transformation, which was basically all of the ideas that eventually went into lean change management, but a few years before the book came out.
I read your book, Lean Change Management, years ago, and I still refer to it every once in a while. And the way that you combine these ideas from different places and introduce them to the communities in a seamless way, I find that to be very useful, and use a lot of canvases and organization tool to kind of focus on what insights have we learned and what can we do next. Like you put it in like nudges. What can we do to nudge things forward? It's not like a big bang approach to things. So since you wrote this book, what has changed? What have you seen as different from back in, I don't know, you wrote the book in 2012 or somewhere around there?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe the ideas have coalesced and gelled together a little better. I mean, back then it was the ideas in the book were all circled around and swirling around Agile transformation. So it was a lot of Agile topics. But the more I think that I connected with people in the OD community and the change community, it's a generalization, which is not true in 100% of the cases, obviously, but they're more focused on a step-by-step linear process. So it's kind of like step one is to do this. So even if it doesn't make sense to do step one, we do it because the process says so. So I think being able to speak more to that community around having more of a meta framework, or I guess just a different set of lenses to look through. So it's kind of like what Agile software teams would do. You focus on delivering the highest valuable things to customers. So as change people, if we take that same attitude and we look through a different set of lenses, we kind of get away from thinking about change work as a control and push thing. And if we move more towards pull, we're more likely to find the right changes at the right time that are going to make sense because we're building things with people in the organization. So instead of going to a place of creating, I've seen this with other Agile methods, frameworks, models, or even in the change world, as they mature, they get more complicated and they take the thinking out of it. So people go, well, where's the guide for how do you do this in this context? And then they create a new diagram and a new flow chart and a new set of whatever. And I've completely avoided that in favor of this is something you have to build in your organization. There's a collection of ideas that are universal. They apply to any organization, but it's kind of how you introduce that into the organization that would be different. So, since 2014, the first workshops up until now, I think I've been to over 12 countries and a bunch of different organizations, small, medium, large, enterprises, multinationals. Thousands of change people later discovered these five kind of universal, not principles, but five universals. Think of one being, if somebody moves in next door, what do? Do you bring out your best practices of introducing yourself to your neighbor and you read through this framework and this method and you go, okay, step one, I'm going to apply this. It's obviously that's kind of a silly case, but that's kind of how we approach change. And, if somebody moves in next door, you knock on their door with a basket of fruit and you say, hey, how's it going? I'm Biff. I live next door. Welcome to the neighborhood. Just let you get settled, but just here's my number if you need to get in touch, or just wanted to introduce myself. And you go from there. People know what the unwritten social rules are. And those exact same things apply in our organizations, but we tend to ignore them and go to a process flow. So those patterns are things that have emerged over time to really take the complexity out of needing a very complex framework and put the emphasis more on how are we building relationships and building bridges between groups and people and organizations and crossing boundaries to integrate people to work in a more agile way.
I noticed a lot of coaches or agile coaches are moving more into understanding the skills of professional coaching and organizational learning and design and things like that. I certainly, went through that journey and tried to focus more on the relationship than the process. Like, as you mentioned, like in the beginning, it was just called agile adoption. Here's what you do to adopt agile, and focus on the tasks and the frameworks and the process. And now there is a shift, even though it's probably was common sense in hindsight to just like you said, the example with the neighbor, you start to build a relationship and go from there. I know you put in the book the story about this conference. I think you mentioned that several times, and I saw a blog post on your blog as well about attending the conference. And I believe Esther Derby told you it's not about you, Jason. And then was that where it started for you, or how did it start? You kind of shift in the relationship.
That got my stance focused in the right direction. So it was the AYE conference with Johanna Rothman, Esther Derby, Steve Smith, Don Gray, and Jerry Weinberg. And it's all based on Satir and MBTI. And I know some people don't like Myers-Briggs at all, but those are the two foundational models that help us kind of navigate the social and human element of change. And that first session, which was a simulation on the Satir model, it got pretty rowdy. The way that it was set up, it was like a physical simulation where, the old status quo had to keep the star of the session in a corner of a room. And I was part of the new status quo, and we had to get them to walk across the room to the other side to get to the new status quo, was the metaphor. And then chaos and, the foreign element were just trying to make things difficult for all of us. And you're talking about allegedly highly enlightened, agile, and change people in the session that almost got into a brawl within like 10 minutes. And the lesson was clear. All the theory goes out the window completely when you're talking about change. Like, you can't control it. You have to dance your way through it. But you can't distill it down to a set of steps and best practices. It hasn't ever worked that way, and it never will. It's just now we kind of know. So that was a lot of fun to go through that. And I think it got me focused on the idea that change it's a servant role. You're not there to manage change, and you're there to facilitate and poke with good questions. Be a cheerleader when you need to be a cheerleader, but you're there to serve the organization. And that's been my entire life. Like, I had my first job when I was 9, which nowadays that's breaking child labor laws. But back when I grew up, it was get your ass out in the field and get doing work. So I've always been in those servant roles, whether it's, waiting on tables or being a short order cook, getting into doing customer support with a few organizations. So that attitude just got reflected in my approach as the change person. So, and really influenced by Jerry Weinberg. The number one rule is be helpful. Nobody's asking you to install Agile in their organization. Nobody's asking you to train people on Scrum. Those might be the words that are coming out, but they're asking for help for something. So just be helpful.
That's a concept that many miss, as they feel like they want to help get change going faster. And that's another area where I'm sure you've seen, like, we have to change and we have to do it by this date or this time. And on a personal level, it's hard to do that personally. So how do you expect others, the big, large organization, to change at the same pace and quote unquote, finish the change by a certain date? Mm-hmm. So what are some experience you've had with this, or where do you start when you have the hairball of things that, okay, we need to change and we need to do this by that time?
I think nowadays it's easier to have conversations around, especially when you're talking enterprise. I think we put too much emphasis on enterprise Agile being the truth about Agile, but it's a teeny percentage. There's hundreds of thousands of companies around the world doing this, and we tend to focus on 10 of them in the enterprise as being the truth. And of course, there's all the dysfunctions that go along with enterprise Agile and things like that. But as far as being able to have the conversations we couldn't 10 years ago, if you look at the Canadian banks, I've been in and out of the 5 of the big 6, basically, over the last decade in a variety of capacities. They've been transforming for 10 to 15 years. Every year there's a new program, or every 18 months there's a new consultancy firm or a new VP of Agile, or like even now they've got, an Agile COE, a business agility COE, an innovation COE, a lean startup COE, a process improvement COE. There's all these, they keep adding these groups on top of it. Mm-hmm. And we can now have these conversations around, well, we've been trying to get these standardized Agile practices for 10 to 12 years. Do we want to keep doing that? Do we want to do something different? I think we have a better frame for the conversation as far as, are we talking about process improvement? And there's nothing wrong with that. In enterprises, especially when you talk about oligopolies like the banking system in Canada or the telecom system in Canada, where it's the big three that control everything, they don't really need to transform or out innovate each other. They just need to keep that whole ecosystem protected. So their transformations will always, more often than not, be process improvement stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. Agile tends to beat those things up. Like, you can't do it that way, but that might be the best they can do. So I think we can have conversations about intention. Do you want to build a better workplace? Do you want to have more engaged people? Do you want to focus on the people side of change, or do you just want to improve processes? So we can be more intentional with our transformations. But I think there's way more companies that we don't hear about that do this well, that operate in the intention of what Agile was when it came out in 2001. Like, look at any of the no-code companies out there, or people who are building on no-code solutions. That's extreme lean startup in Agile. I mean, you're talking, it's so easy to build and validate solutions with customers. They're living this stuff day in and day out, but our brain always goes to the stuff that doesn't work well because that's more fun to talk about, right?
Right. That's what we see, and that's what gets talked about, and everyone seems to have the answer of how it should work or why it didn't work a certain way. But you know, I like what you're saying. Like, you know, what's the intention? What's the intention of the change? Why are we trying to change? I mean, certainly if we talk about it from a personal point of view, if I'm trying to change to become better, lose weight, or have like change a habit, it's different than if I'm gonna run a marathon or compete in the Olympics or something like that. So different intention, different goals require different approaches. So there's no one size fits all to change. So how do you find the idea of setting intentions or coming up with this intention? How does that resonate with companies or people you talk to?
It's almost, if you think about it like a retrospective, but without intentionally running a retrospective. You know, an example would be a company I'm going to do something with next week, well, mid-April, I guess, of 2021. And of course, it's going to be remote. Their intention is, we want to do an Agile tune-up, quote unquote, make sure people are adhering to the Agile process because we have some pain points. So the way I'm approaching it is, well, let's talk about what you've done so far. What have you tried in the past? So let's celebrate what we've done in the past and how it worked and what we liked about it. Now let's look at, why do we want to do a tune-up, or tell me more about the intention of wanting to adhere to the Agile process. Because that's usually code for, you know, I'm the VP of delivery. Our delivery shop is awesome. Our business people suck. That's usually what is underneath, is we're Agile as F and no one else is. So we have to make them adhere to the whatever. So trying to get a different entry point into that conversation around, when you say that, what is it that you mean? Like, what would be better if everybody adhered to the process? Because then it changes their brain to look at the outcomes and to have better conversations. Because it could just be simple things. It could be, you know, maybe our teams aren't structured in a way that allows work to flow through in a smooth way. Maybe the way we have handoffs set up between groups, or maybe there are no social contracts between business and IT as far as how we prioritize work and how we get stuff done. So why this change, why now, is really the heart of how I usually start the conversations, because that gets people to really explore how things work today and what they like and don't like about it. And then now we've got a ton of data. Basically, we can magnify the bright spots, or we can quote unquote fix the bad things. And it's for me, that usually leads to more meaningful conversations than, hey, we need to time the stand-ups, make sure that they're 15 minutes long, because that stuff it doesn't matter.
So it's about building the relationship, having the conversation, asking the curious or asking the questions, and that helps in setting the intention. Like, you know, where do we see ourselves going and why are we trying to get there? And I heard this idea of starting with retrospectives. It's something that could be applicable even if you're not doing Agile, right? You can just start retrospective. And one of the ones that I've seen done at the start of working with a company or a team is the sailboat. What's helping us move forward and what's pulling us back? And so it sounds like when you dig deeper, it's about the interaction. How do we get those people over there to do this or to give us what we want? So it becomes like, you know, how to facilitate that interaction or help them refine the ways that they interact with each other.
And a lot of the times it becomes about compromises. Like we forget that some organizations have constraints that will limit how agile they can be. If you're working more at the team level, and the biggest thing in the way is how the financial model of the company company works as far as how they fund projects and how they do their annual planning, if you don't have access to the CFO about how their accounting system works and about how their funding models work and these things, there's going to be a limit to what you can change. You're going to expose those problems really quickly, but sometimes we have to live with certain compromises because each group will have a ceiling for how much they're willing to actually change. And sometimes I think we don't have the conversations around what do we want to keep the same or what's off the table. So we can, again, go back to intention. And, again, personally as a coach, my job is to try to push that line as far as possible, but ultimately respect the decisions of the people in the organization. If you imagine the first government or public sector org that you worked with, like on day one, you go, we got to reorganize around products instead of projects because that's the agile way. It might take years for a public sector or government to even recognize that that's the actual problem. They got to start with the very basic mechanical stuff first and learn their way towards how much they want to change. And as coaches, we're there for a limited time. So I am happy if I see evidence that the people in the organization are committing to continually improving things when they can, and that they've trained themselves into that evolutionary stance, because we're going to be gone by the time the outcomes show up anyway.
I want to talk a little bit about the evidence, but before I get there, it sounds like as coaches, we're basically trying to identify the gap between where they are and where they want to go, and maybe help them understand what's important about where they want to go. What is the value or the values that they're trying to honor by getting to that? And so helping the individual or the organization or the team see that gap, they can decide whether they want to proceed to close that gap or they just want to do nothing. It's interesting because I was looking through some notes from conferences and I came across this question. I think I picked it up from you. And the question was, what if you do nothing? That's really a question that I think can frame the conversation differently. Because, a lot of times it's not just about the change, it's about whether you can tolerate the pain and that it will take to get there. So that question can help uncover some assumptions around like, okay, what if we do nothing? So you said you have, once you see some evidence or at least see some sparks around like, okay, this is getting traction, now it's time for me to move on. What are some of the evidence that you look for or you try to observe to say, okay, well, yeah, this might stick and now I'm ready to go to my next company or next gig?
For me, it's more anecdotal, which I know some people don't like, but an example would be in one enterprise, one of the program teams that I worked with, when you're in the enterprise, you have to have some kind of onboarding or whatever for people that want to quote unquote run an agile project or program or whatever it is. So we had this idea of you'll go from nothing to ready to start in 3 days. And here's the 3 things we need. So we kept it really simple. The COE that was in place at the time had this just unbelievably complicated onboarding process. They had like 4 layers of hierarchy in their COE, and you got bounced between like 7 people just to get onboarded. And it was a lot of checklist filling out, right? It was too detached from the context of the reality that these teams are facing. So we said, well, we're going to do something different in our area. From nothing to ready in 3 days, first thing is a 30-minute conversation with the SVP on your IT and your business side to talk about why are we doing this? Why now? If we can't get that, we're not helping, because we can't. We can't try to help a part of this organization if it's not clear from the people who are asking for it. So then we kind of agree that, yes, we're going to pursue this. This doesn't mean we're going to work with that team. This just means that, we have enough to get started. So the next thing is a liftoff, which is those 2 same SVPs. You need to be there for the first 30 minutes of a day-long liftoff so we can have that conversation around why do we want to do this and why now? What are our constraints? What support are the people in the teams going to need from the SVPs? And by SVP, I just mean the highest stakeholder on the IT and the business side. So maybe that's VP, maybe that's C-level, doesn't really matter. And then through that process of that liftoff, watching how people behave through those 3 days is the evidence. So one of the teams that I worked with, they were totally energized around wanting to do this. So our last piece of the conversation is, how much time do you think you can dedicate towards learning how to work a different way while you're doing the work? And how interested are you? So just a very basic change readiness assessment. And these guys, they were willing to put in the extra time and they were all really energized to do it. And I did it in an anonymous way, so there was no influence basically. And then right off the bat, these guys said, this team said, yeah, we want you to come to our regular Scrum ceremonies. So they chose Scrum as their framework they wanted to use, but we don't want you to say anything. We just want you to kind of sit there as a fly on the wall and watch how we run that. We want you to watch how we run our retrospectives and all these things. And if we're completely falling off the rails, let us know. By the way, what are some books you could recommend? So they started buying books and sharing stories and doing informal lunch and learns. And they were really motivated and energized around this. So I go back to the stakeholders and I'm like, they're done. They might need a coach to come in every once in a while to just tune things or chat with them. But that's an example of a team that's ready to do it. Yeah. And then I won't tell the long story, but I had same organization, different team, totally opposite. They weren't ready because they had a very hard deadline. So I went back to the leaders and said, we're not going to help them because it'll actually make things worse in their context right now. Maybe after this project is done, we can revisit what an engagement might look like, but it's not a good time.
That's a good indication whether the company is ready, the people are willing and they want to be part of it, because it's hard to work with someone on change who's not willing to change. Like it becomes just counterintuitive. I remember one of my first Agile engagements, it was a company that I was still kind of like my initial journey. And I was trying to help. My definition of help was just, telling them about Scrum and showing these different Agile practices. And I wasn't really getting anywhere. And then, I just intuitively come to, okay, let me just ask casual question around like, what is the last book that you read? And, things like that. And then I realized that there was no intention or willingness around continuous learning or trying to at least get more exposure around the books and the literature out there that point to the new ways of how we work and engagement and moving forward together as a team. And that's when I realized, okay, well, if they are not even willing to read a book, then I don't think they can embark on this change that will take maybe months and years, depending on how far they want to go with it. So that's a really good indication. Is what kind of learning do you hope to get out of this change?
And sometimes they don't need to either.
Yeah.
It really depends on the context. The same organization from the story I just told, one of the HR groups was doing some global HR program. And I remember the head of HR said, Agile won't work here, which Agile community usually has a pretty snarky reaction to that. But the whole idea is get curious, not furious, because I know it's kind of a silly thing to say, but we had a conversation about that. And he was basically not comfortable with taking the risk. It was more about it's better if he messes up payroll for 80,000 people by following the existing process than to try to change things and do it a new way.
So speaking of that, actually, I like that a lot. Like get curious, not furious. How do you get curious? Like, I know you have some questions that you ask, but if we unpack that a little, what kind of questions do you ask? Do you prepare the list of questions that you want to go in with? Do you let it emerge on the fly as you facilitate this?
Nowadays, it's more on the fly because I've done it enough where there's the permanent list of 100 things and 20 exercises given the context. And then I just switch based on what's actually necessary. So one example, I guess, government organization up here, they wanted to apply lean change to this 3-year-long program. And, we didn't do a canvas. We didn't start with any onboarding or training or something like that, because when we had the conversation, it was, well, we already have the 3 vendors. We already paid the X millions dollars for the software. It's going to happen no matter what. So let's start our experiments with what we actually need to do. So then the session was more about creating personas of the people who are impacted, creating a big visible wall, and then doing an inventory of how would we normally do these things in the old world? Like how would we do our stakeholder meetings and our risk meetings and stakeholder updates? And what would be different if we did that in a more agile way? So all that they did was brought stakeholders in front of the big visible wall for 15 minutes once a week. They got rid of a bunch of other status meetings and then went right into experimentation, insights, options, experiments constantly. And the main program lead was just totally energized to do this. And people followed his lead because he was like, everybody loves golden retrievers. years, right? He was like a golden retriever. He was just so easy to work with. He knew everybody. He'd been there for 20 years. So we had really good relationships and stuff like that. So people wanted to work with him and try things that was different, just based on his disposition, which was just fantastic.
So I'm hearing you saying, like, who is a big part of the question, like who will be part of this, who's willing, who's excited about this, and who has the connection or relationships with others. And so are there any questions that you ask yourself as you go in? Like, there are the external questions. You mentioned a few of them, like, what are the intentions of this change and why is it important and who's ready for it? What questions you ask yourself, or are there questions you ask yourself as you embark on a new change?
I have, usually a handful of things that I think I need to know before I can decide if I can help. So you could call it scope, but it's questions that help understand how far they're willing to go. Because a lot of the times, especially when people are asking for transformation, they're just looking for tweaking some processes, and vice versa. They might not be aware about how much of an effect throughout the enterprise that this transformation will have. And once they see those things, they go, yeah, we're willing to do those. So trying to understand like where the fences are, questions around that. Mostly it's open-ended questions based on those initial conversations, right? You know this, you hear certain comments that are kind of like those passive aggressive backhanded things about department X or leader Y or whatever it is. And tell me more about that is a good question. Or, oh, it sounds like this particular department area person is a painful topic. Is this somewhere where we want to go, or do we want to just shelve that, table that, and leave that? And the other part is just, for me anyway, it's trying to confront the assumptions for the organization. I was working with a global manufacturing company that one of the plants, the foreman who'd been there for 25 years was retiring, and they were bringing in somebody new who was much younger. And if you've ever worked in manufacturing or anything like that, you know how it works, right? You got to pay your dues. You got to become quote unquote one of the boys. And I don't mean that in a male female sense. I just mean that as you have to be accepted as one of the people doing the work, or nothing is going to change. So they had a transformation going. How do we make sure the transformation keeps going while this leadership change happens with a highly respected person who's now retiring and leaving that everybody follows? And I said, well, your transformation is parked. Mm-hmm. Like nothing is going to move forward until that relationship gets built, because new Biff has to prove him or herself first to the group before people are going to listen. And that's how humans work. Yeah. I mean, you've probably seen this as an external coach, right? Mm-hmm. You go in and they're like, oh yes, that sounds great. But you don't know what it's like around here until you build some credibility.
Yeah. I remember in the lean change, you have this, once you identify some of the personas, or starting with this, who is part of this, and maybe there are some categories around who might get in the way or be in the way of that, like resistors or some sort of categorization, just to know who we want to reach out and understand their perspective as well. Not all resistance is bad. It's data, it's information that people care about what they have currently, and they are not willing to give it up. They're not willing to do it this different way. Just want to keep doing it the way that they've been doing it. Mm-hmm. And I know, like you said, agile world, sometimes we feel like, okay, this agile doesn't work, it's not going to work here, or we've always done it that way. Seems to be a resistance that we have to get past. It's not necessarily the case. You may want to understand what's driving that, and sometimes it's incentives, sometimes it's just a habit, and sometimes it's the intention. Like stability is a big part of big companies. They want to continue to be stable. So I wanted to just I know we have a few minutes here left, but one of the things that as change agents and coaches, we know that helping others change is not easy. What are some of the things that you do, or maybe routines to recharge or recover?
I always recommend, this is in ICF's coaching model too, is coaches need a support system too, a support system that is detached from the context that they're in. So, that could be, there's a gazillion Slack groups out there where you can connect with people to blow off some steam, doing culture hacking exercises to just try to talk about how you would expose the dysfunctions to the organization, but just as an exercise in blowing off steam. Like you wouldn't actually do some of these disruptive things, but it's a way for you to let this open up the steam valve every once in a while. I did a course last week with a company, was their Agile COE plus a few people from HR and OD and change, which was was awesome to get them all in the same workshop. And, they're in a more conservative company, and their attitude and mindset is so different from a conservative organization that they're almost 3 years ahead in their thinking to where the organization is at. And that can be really, really frustrating. So we talked a lot about how do you pull back? How do you find a support system when it might take 8 or 9 months for a team or this department to get to things you're talking about today? And how do you be okay with that? Because that's the victory. I think we've all had cases where people go, oh, you know what, Salah, I think we should kind of do this thing. And you're like, we talked about this 9 months ago. What's the matter with you?
Right.
And it gets really frustrating, but those are the victories. Yeah. So it's kind of like, how do you back off a little bit? And how do you figure out a way to blow off steam? Mm-hmm. So you don't go crazy, because change work is, leaders think you're responsible and accountable for the change outcomes. And we know we're not. And we're kind of stuck in the middle playing this push-pull game. So we have to have a support system in place. Hobbies, meditation for people that are spiritual or religious, for people who like going outdoors and hiking, going out for runs, playing an instrument. There's got to be some outlet to help.
Yeah, I see guitar in the background. So maybe the next part of the podcast, we can hear you play a bit for us. Yeah, I mean, it's like you're back to where we started when you got that advice or comment at the AYIE conference about like it's not about you, because that's what causes a lot of the frustration and anxiety and feeling the drain of the energy, because you feel like, okay, you're proposing all these things and you can help move things forward and move the needle, but nothing is gaining traction, or maybe not very much is gaining traction. And when you remember, it's not about you, it's about them when they're ready for it. Mm-hmm. So 9 months later, when they say, hey, yeah, this is, do you think this is a good idea? Like you said, you claim the victory and you feel that, okay, maybe I did make an impact. It's not,
yep.
Something has stuck, but it just took a while to get to that point.
Yeah, support it. Great. How can I help you get that done?
Yeah.
Then you go let off steam somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. So is there anything else you would like to share? Any parting thoughts or advice or pointers for anyone who's listening to this?
I think, we've talked a lot about relationships and kind of the informal part of change. It's be genuine and authentic. If you're a coach and you truly believe you're there to help, and you're coming from that place instead of a place from ego, things will work out. You'll figure out how to navigate the social constructs of these transformations, because status will always be a thing. It's not unique to Agile coaching. It's every discipline, title, function. There's people that do it from a place of ego. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be true to who you are and what your stance and what your approach is. And people will see that, and people will come along. If they feel they're being coerced, or they feel you're just trying to be the smartest person in the room and dumping tons of models on them and showing how smart you are and stuff, that's a turnoff for a lot of people, because I used to do that very early because I wanted to prove how much I thought I knew. And I think that's just a circumstance of age, really, like age and experience, right? You do your first couple transformations, you think you know it all, tend to get defensive and cagey and snarky, and that doesn't help anybody. So be genuine, be yourself. And if you're there to help, things will get better.
That's great advice. I mean, I think the experience, and the more you know that you don't know. Yes. Like it's a lot of things that you thought you knew are just like there is a lot more that you didn't know, and it's constant learning. So, but yeah, being genuine and trying to not come from a place of ego is really good things to keep in mind and to apply, practice. So where do people go to find more about what you're doing?
The two main ones, leanchange.org and modernchangemanagement.com are the two links to find out what's happening. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Jason, this has been a pleasure connecting with you again and hearing your insights and wisdom. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. It was nice catching up. Good to see you again.
Same here. Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity. Then repeat.